Several South Africans unite to condemn anti-foreigner xenophobic violence by their countrymates, and President Zuma has called for calm. But is the admission of shame really enough to change the narrative around South Africa and to re-inject some much-needed confidence, perhaps, in Africa's most advanced economy? We'll be answering that question in detail tonight in this edition of Global Business Africa. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Here's what's coming up. Zimbabwe plans to scrap bonuses for civil servants, and they're not happy. We'll tell you why. We'll also be looking at the traffic experiment that brought Nairobi to a standstill and enraged millions across the city. Let's start in South Africa today, where South Africans held a mass rally in Durban on Thursday, calling for peace. Many expressed shock at the rising tide of xenophobic violence against foreigners that has been seen over the last 2 weeks. Just a day earlier, police had to cordon off the streets in Durban because of running battles between South Africans and Somalis, throwing rocks and bottles at each other. At least 5 people have been killed in earlier xenophobic attacks in KwaZulu-Natal, and numerous foreign-owned and foreign-run shops have been looted or burned in the last 2 weeks. South Africa, the population of roughly 50 million, is home to an estimated 5 million immigrants. Unemployment is about 25%. Youth joblessness, however, is far closer to 40%.
If you look carefully, we as black people are attacking one another. I have never witnessed people attacking whites or any other race. It is only black people attacking one another. It is clear that black people do not want to see one another progressing.
Now, volunteers in Durban are distributing food to foreign African nationals who fled to displacement camps in the wake of those attacks. Police broke up clashes between immigrants and the locals in the Cincy Centre earlier this week. In 2008, over 60 foreigners were killed as locals vented frustration over a lack of jobs. Immigrants in downtown Johannesburg did shut down their shops on Wednesday amid fears that the attacks would spread. Many foreigners say they have been left stranded altogether.
I don't know where to go because, no problem in our country. Coming from the war country, and then some of us have some problems in our country. And then we can't just decide to go back home because there are some issues waiting for us there. They already killed our family there, and then how we can go back?
Everything goes back to zero because all the machinery, I got the tile cutters, that cost something like 1.5. About 2,000, this was taken away. And I don't have anything for now, so it's better to go back home and start new life there.
If I go back slightly in 1994, I know South Africans had a problem, and they are also aware of that too. Others were in Kenya, Burundi, Congo, Tanzania and Mozambique, and I know they were never abused like they're abusing us here in South Africa. What I would like to happen is that we treat one another with dignity and stop abusing one another as black people. We are all the same.
Now, just up north from South Africa, Zimbabwe's government has scrapped bonuses for civil servants for the next 2 years. And it's doing that to try and get some breathing room to reorganize and trim down its expenditure. Over 90% of Zimbabwe's revenue is spent on recurrent expenditure, and the bulk of that goes into wages for the state's 500,000 employees. Now, not paying bonuses for the next 2 years could save Zimbabwean taxpayers and the government about $260 million. But, as Farai Mokuturi reports, civil servants are pretty angry.
Finance Minister Patrick Chinamasa has said one of the keys to turning around the economy is cutting back on expenditure. It's logic everyone here agrees with, but this may not be the way civil servants wanted his plan to come together. The news that there won't be a 13th check, a tradition since independence, is still sinking in. Worker representatives think government's high bills are down to politics.
Was it necessary for us to have, for instance, an upper house Senate? It's a cost, understand? Was it okay for us to divide the constituencies, increase the number of MPs? Because that also adds to our cost. Was it necessary for us to change the standard vehicles and give cabinet ministers very expensive vehicles?
The government finds itself between the proverbial rock and hard place. It's promised to deliver millions of jobs, but needs money to create those jobs. Money which it doesn't have, because over 90% of its current revenue is being spent on paying wages. Scrapping annual bonuses for the next 2 years will save about $260 million and will crucially avoid further government borrowing, which would have been the only way to fund the payments. Analysts I spoke to say by continuing to pay bonuses, the government was the odd employer out in a market where most players in the private sector had long stopped doing so due to the pressures of the economy. They want the austerity measures to be backed up by responsible expenditure.
The bonus issue is only the beginning. And it is only a beginning provided the money saved is not immediately squandered again in fiscal profligacy. If we save this money and use it to implement ZIMASET, then we will have made an achievement. But if we take this money and use it to buy vehicles and to go on foreign travels, then honestly and truly, we are just where we have always been.
ZIMASET is an economic blueprint which the ZANU-PF government launched soon after the 2030 elections. Its implementation has been stalled by a lack of funding, which may now have been found. Farai Makutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Over in West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire is embarking on a set of land and tax reforms as part of efforts to attract more FDI into its agricultural sector. The West African nation is the world's biggest producer of cocoa, and it aims to diversify its output in its bid to become self-sufficient in food and also cut poverty rates at the same time. The government's National Plan for Agricultural Investment aims to attract over $3 billion from investors and donors by 2016. Agriculture makes up roughly a quarter of Cote d'Ivoire's GDP, but rural infrastructure requires enormous investment, especially in the wake of political turmoil and a 2011 civil war. Now, foreign donors have already committed roughly 2/3 of that planned target. The remaining funds are expected to come from the private sector. Quick run through equity markets here for you. Some interesting numbers coming through from the JSE today. Some interesting results as well coming through the markets today. Shares in Anglo-American Platinum among the gainers at the JSE earlier today. ACB Miller was also up 1.4%. Overall, really a story about organic growth, and investors clearly loving that part of the story. Ten minutes into the hour, we'll be looking at the traffic experiment that brought Nairobi to a standstill. We'll also be telling you how new strokes of paint got customers trooping back to markets in Josie.
This is the first year that Africa will have more foreign direct investment than aid. And it's like the tipping point in terms of changing the way the continent is perceived. And I think this summit very much responds to that call. Now, whether it can materialize what is being announced is something that we'll have to check and see whether it happens.
Welcome back. You're still watching Global Business Africa from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Now, here's a story for anyone who's had to commute during rush hour. Motorists in the Kenyan capital have been subjected to quite the experiment in traffic control. City officials say this experiment is designed to unclog Nairobi's roads. Now, for many motorists, however, the result has been confusion, frustration in getting to work very late indeed. Waldo Kirelta has more.
For more than a week now, this has been the nightmare facing Nairobi commuters. The quickest way to get around is by motorbike, but not everyone has the nerve for that. And believe it or not, this is a good day. Traffic is actually moving. There have been days of late where it could take up to 4 hours to get to work. Even today, just after 7 in the morning on a main highway into town, traffic is moving at 2 kilometers an hour.
To get to the CBD, it's usually very, very difficult. almost at all times. Before it would be the traffic hours, like in the morning and in the evening, but now it's almost throughout the day, all the time.
You know, yeah, this is my normal route every day, but you see today is so bad.
Yeah, today I think there is much traffic. I'm used to coming this way. So today I think there is much traffic than before.
The city, the heart of East Africa's biggest economy, is determined to get things moving. And its governor, Evans Kidero, has tried what he's called an experiment, blocking off 6 major roundabouts and a string of right turns. Oil drums like these have been his major tool. Kidero has been defending the experiment this week, urging motorists to be patient. But faced with growing anger, he's begun removing the oil drums. It's not clear whether the experiment is over or merely changing gear.
That was a big mess. I'm happy he's removed the drum abouts.
It's not too bad today, actually. I think I've seen it a lot worse. Opening the roundabouts has certainly made a difference. Yeah, so it's a lot better than it usually is.
It's just impossible on the roads these days.
Motorists have their own suggestions for getting Nairobi moving.
They should open other roads, other exit routes, not only one like this.
Nairobi is horrible, but at least it's good to see that somebody is thinking about it and trying to do something about it.
A new highway, the Southern Bypass, may also help, but Kenya's Institute for Public Policy Research says a better solution is encouraging commuters onto public transport and by creating multiple central business districts. It estimates traffic jams cost Nairobi more than $20 million a year in lost productivity, even without the oil drums. And for those caught up in it every day, the cost in terms of quality of life is far higher. Valdi Karlsa, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's figure out what happens from this point on. Mohammed Abdullahi is a county government executive in charge of roads, transport and public works. He's live in studio right now. Mr. Abdullahi, let's start with one of the initial forecasts made by the governor when this experiment was announced. Mr. Kidero said that traffic flow should improve by anywhere between 30 and 40%. Now, if there was traffic modelling done before this experiment started, why did it turn out to be so disastrous?
I think, Rama, what probably I'd want people to understand is that what we decided to do was come up with quick interventions that would not need us to break a bank to implement. And this is what we are calling the phase 0 of our short-term implementation. We have short-term, we have medium-term, and we have long-term plans in addressing this traffic congestion situation. What we implemented, we looked at the A104 as one of the arterial roads that we wanted to look at. And what we wanted to do on this road is just study the pattern of movement on the road and try and see what we can do to improve traffic flows on this particular road. The A104 was picked as a first because it not only facilitates local traffic, but it also facilitates international traffic to the neighboring countries. A104 has about 6 roundabouts. We picked 3 roundabouts, one in Westlands and 2 in Mombasa Road, that's Bunyala and Lusaka roundabouts. Why we picked on these 3 roundabouts is because when we looked at the movements on these roundabouts, over 75% of the traffic that was being processed at these roundabouts were through traffic. And we thought if we facilitated through traffic, then it means 75% of the motorists that are being processed at this roundabout and on this road would actually have relief when they're traveling on this particular route. You realize we never looked at the 3 other roundabouts. That's Haile Selassie, you have Kenyatta Avenue, and you have University Way roundabout. We didn't look at those because the demand on these roundabouts on all sides was almost the same.
Right.
So our idea was to begin with those 3 to facilitate movement on the 3. You realize that Westlands worked very well, and the motorists in Westlands are very excited about that solution.
Just to be clear, Mr. Abdullahi,
yes.
Was traffic modelling done before the experiment was implemented?
We are doing traffic modeling because, like I said, this is phase 0 of our short-term implementation. We had intended to remove the roundabouts, and this is why we did the traffic modeling, to inform the design of the intersections that will replace the roundabouts.
Okay.
Yes.
One other question for you. Is the county government willing to consider imposing a congestion charge in order to balance the load of cars that are coming into the CBD, or essentially using the arterial A104 route every single day?
Yes, like I said, I mean, we have short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans. You cannot impose congestion charges if you've not provided motorists with an alternative, reliable public transport solution. We are in the process of coming up with the Nairobi Metropolitan Transport Authority. That is partnership between ourselves and the 4 neighboring counties that fall in the metropolis, together with the national government. So when that happens and you've given people a viable public transport option, then it means we can now actually impose those congestion charges.
Mr. Abdullahi, according to the data from the Controller of Budget, the absorption rate in the Nairobi County Government for the Public Works and Infrastructure budget for development was just 8% in the first half of this fiscal year. Now, that's a fairly low number. If you're going to be talking about implementing a public transportation system, which will cost money, yet the county government at the moment can't spend what it has effectively, how are we going to get from point A to point B?
You realize the intention for us not quickly running to projects that we had budgeted for this financial year was very simple. There are projects that had rolled over from last financial year, and our aim was to finish up those first before we go into implementation of the projects that we had set aside for this financial year. Okay, but I mean, let's face the facts here. 8% is a very, very small number, and we're already well over essentially 75% into the fiscal year. Surely at this point in time, we shouldn't be talking about 8%. We should be looking at well over 50, shouldn't we? That's true, but you see, again, like I said, our budget again is on paper. What we receive and what we intend to use again do not necessarily match up. So the aim for us was to try and finish the projects we are already on the ground that had stalled because of lack of funding. Those are the projects that we focused on to try and finish up, but we've since advertised for all the remaining projects that we had intended to do this financial year. All right, we'll have to leave there for the time being, Mr. Abdullahi. Thank you very much for your time this evening. We've been speaking to the county government in charge, the county government executive rather, in charge of roads, transport, public works, of course, in Nairobi. Of the 2 million plus cars registered around Kenya, about 60% of them are right here in this little slice of the country, and that should explain part of the congestion. Now, we're still in Kenya. The country is due for a ratings review by Standard & Poor's on Friday, but it has been on the receiving end as far as its twin deficits are concerned. Miriam Bemard sat down with Renaissance Capital's global chief economist Charles Robertson in London to figure out what you should expect from the review. Here's part of her conversation.
Charles, thank you for joining us. Let me start off by asking you, there's been rumblings that we may see rating agency S&P potentially downgrade Kenya this week. What are your thoughts on that?
Unlikely. We've had all the 3 agencies haven't moved ratings on Kenya for a long time. They're all aligned at B1, B+. So unlikely. Why are there rumblings? Because Kenya's running pretty big twin deficits. Current account deficit significant, budget deficit significant, public debt has been picking up over the last few years. So you can understand why, but so far the rating agencies have been downgrading oil exporters, not oil importers. Kenya's benefiting from falling oil imports. So we doubt it.
And based on that, then, what about investors? How are they positioned right now?
Equity investors love Kenya. This is like one of their top picks. They look at Kenya Commercial Bank, which is a very well-run bank, normal sort of bank. Then you've got Equity Bank, which is doing this franchise banking. People love that. And Safaricom, which is the whole mobile money. And that's super exciting. So these stocks have been bid up hugely in the last few years. And we've just put out a report a week or so ago saying that even when valuations are quite expensive, actually over the 5 to 10 years, what equity investors should be looking at is earnings growth. So if you've got good growth in your economy, it doesn't matter where valuations start from. You will be better off investing in a country like Kenya as long as the growth keeps going.
And based on that growth, the World Bank, in its latest economic update, said that falling world crude prices would boost incomes, of course, in Kenya, as you were just saying too, and reduce the high cost of living. So it's really been a benefit for Kenya. Do you agree? And how much of a benefit has it been, really?
It's helping them sustain their current account. It's stopping the current account get worse, but we're heading towards 10% of GDP. So this is a significant sized deficit. It's stopping it get worse at the same time as growth's keeping domestic demand quite high. at least the oil import bill's down, and inflation's running at around 6%. The big story for Kenya, as for most countries in Africa, is food. There was concerns that because of the late rains, there might be a surge up in inflation from food, but they've come late, but they have come enough, and it looks like food will be okay.
Well, what about the government debt that's rising? What does the Treasury need to do in order to sort of tackle the deficit or maintain it?
They're taking a little bit of a gamble. It's a calculated gamble. I think they're probably right, which is that they are going to borrow, they are going to invest, and they're going to use the money from the Eurobond they issued recently to try and boost infrastructure, which is already an ongoing positive process in Kenya. I've been down the new roads that were built a couple of years ago. They're now doing a big port project in Lamu, helped by China's money. They're hoping that growth is going to help resolve the budget deficit, to grow out of the debt problem, to grow out of the budget deficit problem. That's all well and good unless the money dries up, unless the financing stops coming. So far it's coming.
On the domestic front, though, we're also seeing lower electricity prices. So can we see this help perhaps the manufacturing sector, more growth in that area?
This is the next stage in Kenya's development. They export, they import raw material commodities like oil and energy and so on, but they export tea and so on, but they then have to move to the next stage, and the next stage is light manufacturing. And we are seeing signs of that. There are assembly plants being set up. Kenya, Nairobi in particular, is seen as a hub for East Africa. The East African community, a group of a number of nations, about over 140 million people, making overtures to Ethiopia, fastest growing economy last year in the world, over 10% growth. So Kenya, Nairobi becomes this really good hub, and they're hoping that as a hub, as a transport hub, with the ports, the infrastructure, they can start producing manufacturing and exporting to the region, and that's the plan. It's working so far.
Charles Robertson, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Quick run through commodity prices on the program. Now, usually I'm against the whole idea of subsidizing industries simply for the sake of them. But if you happen to be selling your sugar in Egypt, you might want to rethink that again. The country is considering a 20% tariff on white sugar imports. The idea, of course, being that it will bolster its own industry at the expense of, well, exporters to Egypt's sugar consumers. Should be interesting to see exactly how this works out in practice. Hopefully, they can avoid the pitfalls that their Kenyan counterparts are struggling with right now. Coming up next, we'll be looking at the master strokes that have got customers trooping back to markets in Johannesburg.
Africa is not one country.
And Africa is not one story.
But as Africans, we do share one belief.
One more offensive in a
that whatever the challenge, we will overcome.
CCTV Africa brings you unrivaled coverage.
From the fight against Ebola to the fight for greater freedom.
From the figures seeking your vote to the figures shaping your economy.
This is Guy Henderson reporting from the jungles of East.
And all the reasons to celebrate the diversity of life on this great continent.
Welcome back to the program. The South African city of Johannesburg is undergoing quite the urban renewal after years of decline. Once upon a time, it was known as the Golden City, but now downtown Johannesburg is starting to regain its sparkle, drawing in artists, tourists and the fashionable elite to its rejuvenated city centre. Sumitra Naidu found this report.
New food and fashion markets are popping up in the Johannesburg city centre and have become extremely popular for those looking for a casual stroll around over the weekends. These markets reflect the trendy and artistic culture that people enjoy engaging in.
We had our shop here at Old Main. We opened up in 2009, and it was really fantastic to be in the inner city and be part of the regeneration of the inner city. And we just felt that it was great for us and for the small group of creative type of people that came here, but we wanted it to be more accessible for other people.
Not only do they appeal to the curious consumer, but these markets are providing a platform for new entrepreneurs. Bustling with artisans and a range of eateries, there is something for everyone.
I started this business with my colleague from Argentina. His name is Bernardo Corti. We started here selling empanadas 3 years ago, and the business just took off. We made ourselves very famous, very well known here in the markets, made very good friends. We have now an extended menu, and we're also opening up a restaurant in Betty Fox here in the Maboneng precinct.
Johannesburg is the second largest city in Africa and is still widely known as the City of Gold. Once attractive to those seeking a fortune, the city lost its appeal in the 90s. But rejuvenation efforts are slowly bringing that status back. Redevelopment of the town is ongoing. Those visiting the local markets are falling in love with the city again.
This market, oh my goodness. The clothes, the people, the food, the smells, the sounds.
I'm a fashionista. Besides being a chocolate fanatic, I'm a fashionista, so I really enjoy like seeing fashion, the arts, the food. So it's basically, those are my favorite things.
This old warehouse has also been turned into a market venue. Plans are underway to take the local market concept nationwide.
When we started the market, we decided to keep to one day of the week. And we just thought it would be a great Sunday event. Also, the area, as fantastic as it isn't busy enough during the week to warrant a market. So we chose Sundays.
These markets are not only helping to bring people back into the city centre, it's also helping to promote South Africa. A lot of the goods that are sold at these markets are homegrown and are assisting people to buy goods made in South Africa. Sumitra Nadu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Let's run through the currencies here for you. A bit of strength coming back on the South African rand, 11.99 to the dollar today. The naira is still hovering around 198 or so to the greenback. A bit of weakness coming through on the black market side on the Egyptian pound. The central bank, of course, has held it steady at about 7.53 to the greenback in the last 2 months. But the divergence between the official and the black market rate is starting to widen and creep out quite a little bit, partly for structural reasons. Now, here's what we're working on for tomorrow's program. China-based Huajian Shoe Manufacturing Company will be building a $400 million light industry zone in Ethiopia. We're seeing plenty of these in Ethiopia. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, S&P expected to review Kenya. Details on that will come out later on tomorrow. And of course, we'll be keeping tabs on that story and plenty more right across Africa. That's it for this edition of the program. We'd like to hear what you think about what we do around here. Send your feedback to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And of course, Facebook and Twitter are still your ports of call. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Ramanyani.